Give yourself a round of applause. This is the second event that we've held out here, and it's Liberty Behind the Lines. We're talking about libertarianism in Hollywood, so I guess that's a good thing. And look around the room, because there are people who support your ideas and what you believe in, and that's really the reason why we hold these things, is so that you guys can meet each other and get to recognize that you're not alone. Because I know a lot of people feel that way, and we don't want you to feel that way. We're lucky enough tonight to have Scott Horton with us, and he's in town. So I don't know what the order of event is, but I know you were going to talk a little bit. Was that the plan? Was it you were going to give a little speech?
I've never heard Scott talk.
I actually have an official welcome presentation.
Well, then, let's do that then.
You guys tell me the order.
Well, you know what's funny, by the way? This,
I missed that joke. I was still providing punchline. Quietly.
We've got a drum kit sitting on the speaker right back here. So every time we speak, there's a nice little drum roll. So every joke it hits tonight, guys. Every joke hits.
I didn't bring any jokes.
All right, well, welcome. Liberty Behind the Lines and Liberty on the Rocks combined, correct? Who's there? Anyone here? This is their first ever libertarian event.
Hey!
Whoa!
Wow!
I was expecting like one. You guys are brave. Welcome to the dark side. Welcome to the dark side. I've lived in LA like 22 years. My name is Michael, and oftentimes being a liberty lover, I feel like, I guess, alone. An island. But that's why I think events like this are so important, because it reminds us that we're a community. We really are a family, even if we argue about the most meaningless shit. Papa versus Tucker, Mises versus Cato, Sarwark versus Woods, Minarchist versus ANCAP, all that stuff. We really still are family. And I'm really extremely grateful for events like this and for people like Pablo Serrato, who have been doing The dude literally has been doing this, organizing events like this for years. A thankless job. So thank you very much, Pablo. It's very important what you do. So are we doing a podcast after this still?
We were going.
Does anybody have an SD card? There's some geeks here. No.
We
We're going to do an exclusive podcast that doesn't air as a podcast anywhere.
I might live
It's a
stream
live
it.
podcast for you people only, or maybe for Michael's live streaming Facebook audience.
So if anyone wants to yell anything racist, don't worry. Not
On
gonna
my
happen.
Facebook, it's fine. So, I guess we're going to do a live podcast with the awesome Jason Stapelton, Marc and Brian here, the awesome two dudes. Breck and Shop, right? You guys have no pressure. It's got to be
Don't
easy.
mention our podcast name or anything.
And we're going to do some Q&A. So if you have questions
Two awesome
after
dudes.
Scott's talk, please come up, ask questions. He will love to answer every single one of them.
Extended leg.
And by the way, if this is your first libertarian event, they are all this hot. Unblooded, baby! Check it and see.
So I came up with a list of things on how I wanted to introduce Scott, because the man has so many incredible accomplishments that it's impossible to just kind of rattle them all off. I wanted to limit them. First of all, the author of the extremely important book,
That I can't remember the name of.
Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. He is selling them and will sign them, right?
Yes.
He'll sign them. He takes credit card cash, gold,
Audio
silver,
book now available too.
all your
Like radio
crypto.
things.
So please make sure to purchase that book. It is finally available as an audiobook now, I believe, as well. So that's one. Two, he's the opinion editor at antiwar.com. It's one of 3 websites I visit every single day. The host of Anti-War Radio every Sunday here in Los Angeles on KPFK. He's the father of the important principle called Horton's Rule. That is, you should know this. If you're libertarian, you're always better than the left on their own issues, and you're better than the right on their own issues. So when some right-winger tells you, oh yeah man, I support concealed carry, Scott will remind them with the Horton rule that we don't need fucking permission from any government people to defend ourselves or our families. And I don't have a good idea for the other side, but whatever. He's also one of two people in my life that I've ever been extremely nervous to be interviewed by. The reason being, he knows more about what you're going to talk about than what you know about what you're going to talk about. True story. He was my neighbor on the Contra Cruise. If you aren't going to attend, it's leaving from Southern California this year. There is no way better to get in touch with some other people in this movement than to hang out with them for an entire week, 24 hours a day.
You talk about hot, libertarian, and libertarian sex.
I mean, it's mostly dudes, but it's cool.
Oh, hi. Hello, baby.
And then, of course, Scott is the host of the Scott Horton Show. 4,500 some odd podcasts over the years.
Take you anywhere.
Also available on YouTube. He would probably want you all to think that the amount of information that he's learned over the years, that he teaches people, he's just some ordinary dude. Anybody can learn this, he claims. But the fact of the matter is, only he has learned all of this. So while the rest of us might have the capacity to do this, we do need dedicated people who are willing to put their whole lives into an issue as important as war and peace as what Scott has done. I think he's completely inspirational and a living hero. So please, everyone. Now that is a factual statement to Scott Horton.
Best intro I've ever heard.
Very kind. Thank you, sir.
Just
All right.
true.
All right, so I was told to try to kind of keep it brief. So instead of talking about the whole terror war, I'm going to talk about two of the lesser known, lesser complained about terror wars that are actually extremely important but just don't get coverage because of Iraq, or they're even overshadowed by Afghanistan, and that's Yemen and Somalia. So I guess we'll mostly go in chronological order, and that being the Somalia War. So you might be familiar with this clip from General Wesley Clark, who was the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, where years after the fact, he came out and said right after September 11th, he was shown a memo with a hit list of 7 countries that they were going to overthrow in 5 years. And Somalia was on that list. And what had happened in Somalia was they had had a communist dictatorship during the days of the Soviet Union. And their communist dictatorship fell apart right around the time that the Soviet Union did, at the beginning of the 1990s. And for most of the 1990s, they endured civil war. And you guys are probably familiar with the story of Black Hawk Down, which they made a movie out of, where George Bush Sr. had started this Operation Restore Hope to provide food aid to the people of Mogadishu. And it had escalated and escalated in a government program type fashion into an effort to hunt down these warlords and capture them, including this guy, Adid. And it didn't work out, and a Black Hawk helicopter crashed, and some Army Rangers and Delta operators were killed, and their bodies dragged through the streets. And so Bill Clinton said he just got there. It was, I think, the first half of his first year in office. It was that summer of '93. And Bill Clinton said, "This isn't my mission, I don't want to do this," and pulled the guys out. And that's pretty much the only thing most Americans have ever heard about intervention in Somalia. But so, except maybe with one exception, this is something that libertarians are familiar with, maybe only in a very perverse sense, that we're often accused of promoting Somalia as somehow the archetype of a free society and all the benefits that come with liberty.
Is that not right?
Well, by the way, I was once stopped in traffic by a guy.
Hang on, sorry, dude. Hang on, which one are you?
No, this is Scott's mark. So
Clearly
the mic
don't
wasn't
matter.
on.
It's not your turn to talk.
I had a Ron Paul bumper sticker on my my car, and a guy stopped me in traffic and rolled down the window, and I was like, clearly he's hitting on me. But he goes, "Hey, libertarian, how's Somalia working out?" And then pulls away. I was like, "Yeah, thanks,
Which
Dick."
of course, Ron Paul is like the only guy in DC at that time who was
At that
good
time,
on
yeah,
Somalia
this is-
at all, who would have told the truth. Yeah. Okay, but so the deal of it is, there was a kernel of truth in this, which is that, luckily for the people of Somalia, the way that the civil wars ended there in the late 90s, I guess, was that all the different warlords were basically exhausted and no one really won. And so there was a sort of de facto anarchy. And no one had enough power, for example, to control taxes at the port of Mogadishu, which was wide open. And the cell phone industry, as one major marker, was the fastest growing in sub-Saharan Africa. And there were libertarian economists who studied Somalia and said liberty, and not that they had discovered Rothbardian economics and had all agreed as a society to adopt it, but just because no one had the power to be the state, it was the best that anyone had had it in Somalia in a very long time, and their economy was growing and growing. And so some libertarians had made some hay about that and said, see, you don't need a central plan, you just need to let people have the ability to govern themselves and take care of business in a laissez-faire way, and it'll work, and it was working. But then came George W. Bush. And there's a little bit the fault of some of the libertarians, and I won't name names because I forget now, but I do remember seeing that after George Bush began to destroy Somalia in 2001, there were American libertarians who were oblivious to this new development in the situation and continued to cite Somalia as some example of freedom working, when really freedom had been unable to prevent Uncle Sam from coming in and intervening and screwing everything up. And so everything bad now in Somalia is blamed on freedom, partly due to some clumsy efforts by libertarians to promote the short period of good times that they had there, relative good times. But what happened in 2001 was the Bush administration sent CIA and special operations forces, and they started bribing warlords to hunt down Islamists, and including the son of Adid, who was the bad guy warlord from Black Hawk Down in 1993. And they started supporting Adid and his buddies, and they were just criminals. And so they used the guns and the money that they got from the CIA in order to make, to increase their own power and influence, make more enemies for themselves, and create more chaos. And the more that they did so, the more that they provoked a reaction by different local forces against them. And this kind of went in a back and forth kind of thing between 2001 and leading up through the real change came in 2005, when you had 13 separate groups that finally came together. War is the health of the state, as Randolph Bourne says. War, in this case, created a state. And 13 different separate groups came together and formed the Islamic Courts Union that had one job: kicking the warlords out. And it worked. And they kicked Adid and the other warlords out into Ethiopia. And at this point, the Bush administration got angry, and at Christmas 2006, by the end of 2006, they'd had enough and supported the Ethiopian invasion. And the CIA and the Special Operations Forces were in on the invasion at the time, flying C-130s as support and logistics and everything. So it was America's war. It wasn't just, it was a satellite, Ethiopia as a satellite of America. But it was George Bush's invasion, truly. And they succeeded in smashing the Islamic Courts Union. But the weakest and smallest of those 13 groups in the Islamic Courts Union was called Al-Shabaab, the youth. And the reason they were the weakest and the smallest group was because they were the youth, and so they weren't in charge. But once the Ethiopians and the Americans invaded and smashed the Islamic Courts Union, the youth were the ones who fought. And so they ended up rising into what we now know. If you ever hear any headlines about Somalia at all, it's that there's this terrible Al-Qaeda type movement of terrorists called Al-Shabaab, and somebody's got to do something about them. Apparently history started yesterday, and now we have a problem with these guys. But that was where they actually came from, was resistance to the American-sponsored Ethiopian invasion. And so ever since that time, in Christmas 2006, the Ethiopians have been there, been driven out, and come back again. The Burundians, Ugandans, and Kenyans have been there under the auspices of the African Union forces. There have been two CIA-backed torture prisons there, one documented by Jeremy Scahill, the other by Eli Lake, who I normally wouldn't cite, but this one seemed legit. He found it there in northern Somalia. And now this is the real outrage to me out of all of this, is that, and this is in Jeremy Scahill's book well, first of all, in 2008, the Bush administration was running out of time for their policy, basically. So they had to call it quits. They had to have some pseudo-resolution before they passed the baton to Barack Obama. So they basically gave up their policy of completely overthrowing the previous system. And they told the leader, who had been the chief under the Islamic Courts Union, a guy named Sheikh Sharif, that you can go ahead and be the president after all. Our entire regime change war against you notwithstanding. But you can't call the Islamic Courts Union. You have to be under the form of the transitional federal government that we've created for you. And if you'll agree to that compromise, then you can be the president after all. And he agreed to that. And so on page 222 of Jeremy Scahill's book, Dirty Wars, he quotes the State Department official saying, well, we just wanted to take Sheikh Sharif down a peg. And they waged this entire war that had gone on for 6 years and had killed tens of thousands of people. And the Ethiopians had committed mass atrocities, of course, against their historic enemy when they had invaded, and plus the ones committed by the Americans themselves. And all of this, according to the Bushis, by the time they were done, was simply just to take Sheikh Sharif down a peg. And now Al-Shabaab is a problem that will not go away. And the state of conflict in Somalia has taken this country that is one of the very poorest in the world and has put their economy on basically not under strain. It's basically abolished their economy. It's destroyed it, all the chaos. And so this formerly very quickly, rapidly advancing economy. And so in 2010 and 11...
Can I just ask you one question, because I'm interested in this, in the sense that, is your contention that Somalia was doing well under anarchy prior to U.S. intervention?
Well, I'm saying they were coming from communism,
right,
which was basically nothing.
right.
And so they were on their way, building up and doing better. And it was one of the fastest growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa at the time.
But
until America intervened and arrested that development.
Okay,
so I'm not saying that everything was great, but I'm saying the counterfactual is clear that they were doing better, and I was right at the part where America makes sure that they all starve to death.
No,
because
I
what happens is the drought comes to the Horn of Africa in 2010, 11, and 12. But in Kenya and in Ethiopia, and in Eritrea, they were able to weather the storm of the drought. Bad turn of phrase, but understand. But in Somalia, they couldn't weather it because they had no capitalism. They had no distribution. They had chaos. And so the farmers hadn't been able to plant their crops nor harvest them. And the ones who had didn't have the ability to take them to market. And by the way, there was no market and there were no customers and nobody had any money. And the entire thing was broken. And so where libertarians, above all, like to emphasize that, for all the commie complaints about greedy capitalism and profits and corruption and whatever, capitalism has abolished famine from the face of the earth. Except in places where the most powerful capitalist country in the world is deliberately inflicting mass chaos on helpless poor people and making sure that they can't feed each other. And so, according to America and Britain's FuseNet, which is their famine early warning system, 250,000 people starved to death in the famine of 2010 through 12 that otherwise would not happen. And of course that means children under 5 primarily, probably 3/4 of them, and the rest the elderly and the sick. This is who's laying down and dying in refugee camps on the side of the road. It's the most powerful country ever, ours, picking on the most helpless people ever who did absolutely nothing. And in fact, if you go back to their original rationalizations in the Washington Post in 2006, they say, well, there are 3 guys who the FBI wants for questioning in the case of the Africa embassy bombings. They're suspects wanted for questioning. And so apparently there's no other way to hunt these 3 human men down than to sponsor this war and this half-assed regime change. And of course, Al-Shabaab, once Sheikh Sharif and his men agreed to Condoleezza Rice's terms and joined the government, Al-Shabaab said, you guys are a bunch of traitors, and they of course have continued their war this whole time and left the country continuing in chaos.
Scott, I'm not gonna lie to you, I feel terrible. Like I'm literally depressed right now.
It's really bad. And you know what, honestly, if you think about it from the literal amount of suffering to the amount anyone gives a shit ratio, it's so out of whack, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's no different than what Bush did to Iraq in Iraq War II, and yet at least we kind of care about that, maybe because Americans we know died in it or something like that. But nobody cares what we do to the Somalis. I mean, it's just completely out of control. And of course, if this was all going on at the hands of the Iranians or the Russians, Our whole society would be following TV's edict and saying, all crying about how much we love the Somalis and how we have to go save them from the evil enemy oppressor. But when it's the USA doing it, turn a blind eye. I know, and it's not y'all's fault. I mean, y'all live in the same society as me. It's why you've never even heard this shit before, at all. Right? And then we have time to do Yemen too, or is that it? Are y'all?
Hey,
y'all
look, man,
everybody need a drink? You want to come back in a minute?
If you want to further express the misery, then please do.
Okay, so right across the Bab al-Mandeb, that's the gate of the Red Sea there, at the gap between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Right across there from Somalia is Yemen. So the Saudi Arabia is obviously crooked to the northwest, right? But it's, for all intents and purposes, the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula, right? And that's part of why we're messing with them, is strategic reasons, the same as the Somalis. But so this one is really bad, and it's pretty easy to tell, I guess. So Barack Obama comes into power. George Bush had killed a couple people with drones in Yemen, but he hadn't really had a big campaign in Yemen. Barack Obama comes in, and in fact, part of having a drone war in Pakistan meant a lot of the remaining Al-Qaeda guys in Pakistan said, well, screw this, I'm going home to Yemen, or wherever they were from, back to Libya and other places. And some of them came to Yemen, and there were already a core group of them there. And Obama and the CIA launched a drone war. It was pretty famous, not really a covert action, and pretty much everybody knew this is one of our drone wars against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, well, part of being able to do that was Obama paid a bunch of protection money and weapons to the dictator of Yemen, a guy named Abdul Salah. And for intents and purposes anyway, picture basically the east of the country is mostly desert. Most of the fighting here is between north and south. And the capital city of Sana'a happens to be pretty much right in the middle, geographically speaking, north and south. So this guy Salah, he actually kind of represents a compromise between different tribal factions enough that he's able to be the president of a united Yemen, which was not always united. And so Obama pays him money and guns to let the CIA kill the Al-Qaeda guys. Well, at the same time, Salah's playing a double game, and he's backing these Al-Qaeda guys, and he's actually using them and their other Islamist friends in order to attack his enemies in the north, the Houthis. And the Houthis, that's a political designation. They're Zaidi Shia, unlike the rest of the population of Yemen who are Sunnis. They're Zaidi Shia, but this is their political group, is the Houthis. And Salah uses the American money and guns and support and his jihadist friends to attack the Houthis about 4 or 5 times in the Obama years. And each time he does, sort of like his own little war on terrorism writ small, it backfires in his face, and the Houthis get more and more powerful each time. Well, in 2011 and 12, the Arab Spring comes, and there was a lot of dissension in Yemen and a lot of agreement from all different factions that they wanted to see Salah go. And then there were 2 different assassination attempts on him, one which hit but didn't kill him. And so he basically, at that point, the Saudis and Hillary Clinton decided it was time to ease him out and replace him with a guy named Hadi. And not to get too bogged down in the details, but it is kind of funny that Hillary Clinton said, now we are giving democracy to Yemen. And they held an election with 1 man on the ballot and 1 little oval for you to put your check mark. And it was just like when I was a boy and they taught me about the Soviet Union, that yeah, they have elections, but there's only 1 party on the ballot, and you better vote for them in the proper order too on there. The same kind of thing. And so they put this guy Hadi in, the vice president, but he had no real pull in the country. No real power factions favored him other than the Saudis. But in the country, he didn't have any real support. And so the Houthis in late 2014, early 2015, they come down and they march on Sana'a and take the capital city. Now, Barack Obama himself admitted on camera, you can find this on YouTube somewhere, where he says that the Iranians told their friends, not really their allies, but their friends, the Houthis, don't take the capital city, because you're just going to freak the Saudis out and they're going to start bombing you. It's going to start a war. So, leave well enough alone. You're doing fine. Quit while you're ahead. And the Houthis went ahead and seized the capital city of Sana'a anyway, kicked Hadi out. He fled to Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis started bombing. And now, again, like with Somalia, this is, I think, Iraq War II level cynicism and murderousness. There's an article, you can read it in the New York Times, where it's a press release by the Obama government. It's not like some scoop. The sources for the article are 17 White House officials, National Security Council officials, right? This is Obama said, put this in the Times. So this is their explanation for why they went along with the Saudis' war here. Well, we know that the war will be long, bloody, and indeterminate. Long, bloody, and most important, indeterminate. We have no real idea of an endgame of how this is supposed to play out in any satisfactory way. But we're going to do it anyway because we have to placate the Saudis after the Iran nuclear deal. The Iran nuclear deal, which is perfectly well and good, and takes their civilian nuclear program and locks it down beyond any reason, but was actually completely unnecessary because guess what? Iran was already members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, already had a completely safeguarded civilian nuclear program. They never were making nuclear weapons. All of that is a hoax, and it always has been a hoax. But what Obama did, and this was possibly wise in and of itself, all things being equal, was he said the fake threat of an Iranian nuclear program has led us close to war enough times that we really need to take this fake threat off the table by locking it down double. It says guaranteed to be civilian as any nuclear program could possibly be. Now you can't lie us into war based on it, no way. And that was why he did it. But then, so you might wonder, well, doesn't that help the Saudis? Because if the Saudis are the Iranians' enemies across the Persian Gulf there, doesn't this help guarantee their security by double locking down the civilian nuclear program in Iran? The answer is, of course, yes, right? But it made the Saudis paranoid that America was about to start tilting back toward Iran and threaten Saudi's place in America's order in the Middle East. And so to prevent that, this was a way of making sure to get America to directly and immediately fight a war on their behalf. And it is America's war. Just like when they try to hide behind a little deniability using the Ethiopian army, it's no different when they use the Saudi Air Force, when they're all American planes, American bombs, American intelligence officers and mercenary contractors who are doing all the intelligence and picking all the targets. And it's just hearsay, but it's really good double hearsay. It's two unconfirmed but separate reports from Andrew Coburn, the great journalist, and Dan Simpson, a former ambassador, that at least for a time in this war, in the beginning, you literally had white American officers flying in the back seats of the F-15s, holding the Saudi princelings' little hands all the way to their targets, where they're bombing civilian targets and killing women and
Well,
children.
didn't they also just, news came out, I think, that they were actually on Green Berets on the ground in Yemen now.
Well, so that's the new news, is we know that they've had special operations forces on the ground fighting the Al-Qaeda guys, but in the war for the Al-Qaeda guys against the Houthis, we were told that no, it's only by way of helping them with their naval blockade, helping them with all of, as I was saying, the air war on the Saudi side. But now they're saying they have American Army Green Berets, right? Green Berets on the Saudi Yemeni border hunting down missile sites there. And which in fact just a couple of weeks ago, and Rand Paul was supposed to be on this but never showed up. But it
You're
was
supposed to be here tonight, guys.
No, on the Senate bill.
That piece of shit.
It was the Sanders-Mike Lee bill to invoke the War Powers Act to force an end to the war in Yemen. And the Trump administration lied right to the Senate's faces and told them that there are no troops on the ground in any way and fighting in this war. And so there are some who are saying, and they were only five votes short when they voted to table it. So it could have gone to a full vote, and they're going to maybe have a revote based on the fact that the Trump administration lied right to their faces about it. But this is a really big deal in the fact that the Senate or the House had never invoked the War Powers Act to try to force an end to an American conflict. But there's no way that you can spin this as part of the war against Al-Qaeda or part of the war against the Islamic State. This is the war for Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, against their enemies, these Shiite Houthis in Yemen. And the real point is that just across the way, or just as it is across the way in Somalia, there's been massive famine. And of course, this is no surprise really, right? That the IMF and the World Bank had previously gangsterized the Yemenis out of their sorghum crops and the food and the regular crops that they grew to feed their own population. And instead they say, no, don't worry, take a bunch of IMF and World Bank money and we'll collectivize your land under corporate control and we'll have you grow coffee instead. Welcome to the global economy, it's going to be great. Until the US Navy puts a full blockade on you and prevents all international trade for 3 years. You can't eat coffee. And so they, have had to basically start their entire domestic food crop economy all over again from scratch under war. And it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's the worst cholera outbreak seen in 50 or 100 years, according to the health officials. Certainly thousands and thousands of people have gotten cholera there. And just like under the Iraq sanctions, just like in the war in Somalia, what really kills people is the poverty. It's the absolute desolation and desperation brought on by the war. So whatever percentage of people die by actual gunshots and explosions and drone strikes and this kind of thing, you have that many people who also die from the flu because they just have no clean drinking water, no access to medicine, no nothing. So this is what we call the excess death rate that we won't even know for years until we look back and see at what rate were the Yemenis dying before 2015 and at what rate they were dying in so far the 3 years of, again, the most powerful nation in world history's war against them. And so, yeah. And now, can I say just one thing to make it not quite just all starvation to death by babies?
Please do.
So, I mean, not that this is too light or a funny joke or whatever, but just so you can see why this is important. It's not really important to libertarianism. It's not important to, like, whatever. It's just important for liberty. It's important for humans. And so, this is, it's always kind of funny to me to hear the way Michael put it, like, only I am able to do this. Because, the whole point of me is that I'm obviously just another one of you guys, and I just decided to take an interest in this. But if everybody looks at it like, well, there's one libertarian who cares enough about the war in Somalia to know enough to tell the story to teach somebody else, and so the rest of us can go back to tax policy or municipalization of garbage service or whatever, then, even if we're just being selfish for our own influence, don't you think that foreign policy is where libertarians have the comparative advantage? Because we're always anti-war. We're not partisans ever, right? And if there's anything we hate, it's rich people cashing a welfare check and a laissez-faire system completely twisted by an arms economy for the last 80 years, right? This is what we all insist on an end to somewhere in our list of priorities. It just seems like, I don't know, I guess I kind of wish that I think that if the libertarian movement really prioritized opposing the wars, then we could help with the rest of the Americans and get them to see. And as he was saying about attack the left from the left and the right from the right, that if you're arguing with a right winger, you have 100 different anti-war arguments about family values and about sound money and about the national debt and about the chaos of Eurasia. And who thinks that a bunch of American Marines can tame that for $1? It's crazy, this thing, if you put it that way. Who wants to be the policeman of the world if you're selling to the right, if you're talking to the right? And of course, if you're talking to the left, then there's all the great arguments against their worst enemies, the Pentagon and their contractors killing people, right? Which they all presumably, in their core are opposed to. It gets a little confused when Barack Obama's their leader for 8 years and things get weird. But in their core, they're the left, broadly speaking, liberals, progressives, leftists in America have no real taste for war or any of this stuff. The polls show that the people agree with us. They just don't give a shit. So I'm thinking, like, really, why would they if we don't? But if we did, and we were the ones constantly demanding war crimes trials and constantly demanding an end to the war yesterday and constantly and with confidence shouting down those who say that, yeah, we just have to do one more intervention to solve the problems from the last one, then maybe we could actually move the needle a little bit instead of just kind of clucking our tongues and saying, yeah, did you hear the one about Somalia? I didn't even know that one. Why should we settle for a system where we have more wars than we can keep track of, where we don't even know where our guys are fighting anymore, right? pretty sure.
Let me move an issue I brought before. So, hello, I'm Brian from Lions of Liberty. But don't laugh. I'm too hungover. It's not worth it. So, I brought this up before though, and Scott makes a good point. Libertarians need to be in the conversation. We're not, especially on the war thing. What happened to the anti-war left? Disappeared. What are you looking for?
The anti-war left? Well, it's the Democrats, King.
Right.
It's the same thing that happened to the anti-government right as soon as he went away.
Exactly, right? They disappeared. All the people disappeared. But the point of it, trying to make is that the Libertarian Party is so underrepresented as far as actually being a part of the conversation. We, on a local level, can do what we can do, right? Jason's got a podcast, I've got a podcast, Scott's got a podcast, and a radio show, which is awesome. In LA, which is shocking, by the way. People crash their cars. Every time there's an accident on the 405, I guarantee it's because somebody accidentally put on Scott's show and was like, what the fuck? It's trash. But,
It's on KPFK. It's not an easy, like, shoe-in. I mean, you know.
what are you, his marketing manager?
This is
Actually,
It's on KPFK.
It is like KPFK. I know. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Libertarian Party does not have anybody in position, or at least as far as I know, that actually is actively working for them to put them into the conversation nationally. When an issue comes up, like sending 120 Tomahawk missiles to Syria for a gas attack, we still can't explain. We have no libertarian out there talking about it. Because there's nobody actively pitching that person. There's nobody working with the media to put libertarians in that position. And honestly, this is just me talking. I don't personally think Nick Serwak's the guy to do it. Now, you may have your opinion on that or not.
yes.
But my main point is that libertarians are left out of the conversation. We are the third largest party in this country. People are brainwashed, but if we can get out in front of people and talk to them and be on the goddamn news, we might have a shot.
I think that's right. And you know, I think the Libertarian Party, it's always, I mean, to me, it's kind of a pale imitation of the Libertarian movement. Maybe they don't even know that there is a Libertarian movement outside of the party. I don't know. But, I mean, I like Libertarian Party members. I really do. I've met a lot of them over the time and whatever. Yeah. But so my story about the Libertarian Party is in 2004, I got an argument with Judge Gray. Are you guys familiar with Judge Gray? Oh yeah, so I'm in Southern California. So what's great about this guy is he's, you know, a former Republican turned Libertarian, but he's still kind of a very stodgy, conservative, old white guy, former judge. And he's, no, this is what's great about it. No. Because he's anti-drug war, right? So if he was some liberal black woman judge and he said, well, I'm against the drug war, you would go, okay, well, welcome to the fight, and we're all fighting and losing together, right? But when you have kind of a stodgy, rich old white guy from Orange County, Republican judge, and he's against it, well, you know, it's not that he cares so much about the poor Mexicans that he's locking up. It must be something else other than like his bleeding heart, right? And it's that he's smart. And he realizes this is crazy. This is, sorry to coin a phrase, a fool's errand. To try to somehow contain...
You think that about the war in general.
On sale now.
The war state in general, you think
Right.
that. No.
Well, I'm telling a parable here. So Judge Gray, like, not only is he good on the drug war, right, but he's good for us to use against anybody else on the drug war. Look at this guy. Why do you think he's got it right? It's because he thought about it for a minute, and he's right? Well, what an exact, perfect way to attack the right from the right on the war. And the year 2004, the issue was the Iraq War. The issue wasn't even George Bush. The issue was the Iraq War. And the Democrats had the most pale imitation of Bush, literally 1 year apart from him at Yale, and John Kerry running against him, promising to be a more efficient and competent commander of what Bush was doing, and had basically nothing going for him. So the Libertarian Party, and I don't mean to criticize Badnarik, the candidate, because he's a good guy and he was doing his best, but the whole Libertarian Party leadership on the national level should have been at nuclear war, DEFCON 1 H-bombs lobbed every single day at George W. Bush and all the former Democrats in his administration who got us into this war and attacking him from the right. And they could have been destroying him. The issue was the war. And if all they'd done was help John Kerry get elected, all they would have done is help George Bush be defeated after lying us into war. right? And they didn't do it. They weren't there. And I said this all to Judge Gray. This is our thing. This is our comparative advantage in the market. We're capitalists against war. It's interesting, ain't it? Why aren't we just warmonger Republicans like other, white guys with buttons on their shirts or whatever, And so, and what Judge Gray said was, well, we can't leave now because the violence would get worse. Which is one, just Fox News Republican talking point of 2004, and two, the most false thing he could have possibly stated. Because it was America staying in Iraq from the moment I had that conversation with Judge Gray on. That was what really fomented the Civil War that killed 1 million people and turned the entire Middle East upside down. If they left then, things would have been at least less worse, right? So not only was that a stupid political position to take, it was completely bankrupt and wrong. And if the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement had an absolutely unapologetic stance against all this intervention, I don't care how scared you say you are of Iran or of Al-Qaeda or whoever the boogeyman is, in North America we are safe. These people threaten our interests in the Middle East, but our government doesn't have the right to have interests in the Middle East any more than Middle Eastern countries have the right to have interests in our country. And so not just am I saying the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement have fallen short on this, but that they could be doing really great. They could have done really great this whole time, and they could start doing really great right now.
Well, that's
where
okay. It's a lost opportunity.
This is what makes the Libertarians better than everyone else. Is we're the best on the worst thing, right?
Exactly, man. And that's exactly to your point. They fail on every level, capitalizing on atrocities that are going on the United States is perpetrating. They cannot take advantage of any of this shit. Meanwhile, you have people in the Libertarian Party posting stuff on Facebook